Good.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call to order the City Council work session with the Planning Commission of Wednesday, March 29th. And first would like approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is there any public comment before we start the meeting? Jen?
And Hebert Warman, PO Box 778, Cannon Beach. I just wanted to thank you all for doing this, getting it moving. It's so important. And I wondered if I could just ask, if you haven't already run this by Cameron LaFollette or someone like her who gave that wonderful tutorial, if you could please try to do that, I think it would be really important. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. Any other public comment? Oh, I'm sorry.
Signed up for it. Is this where I speak?
Sure. Come on up. Thank you.
Council members, good evening. And staff, my name is John Lansing. I'm running for the Port of Astoria position number 4. I'm doing some fact finding with people in South County. You've been kind of overlooked for a while, and Port has been criticized for it, and you're all taxpayers. And part of my plank is to see if I can be an ear for you in the South County, and if I can give you elected officials a phone call every once in a while, or certainly during the election process. I need to do my homework. I know quite a bit about the port. I've been on the budget committee for the past 10 years. I currently am the chairman of the finance committee, and the port has gone through some interesting changes over the last couple of years. Being on the budget committee and the finance committee, I made recommendations. It's kind of fallen on deaf ears. So now I figured I'll run for public office and see if I can put a little bit of a spin on it. Your video was quite disturbing. I need a haircut. I need to lose some weight. Anyway, very nice to see you guys. I hope that if I get elected, I'll be available for you. I'm at this point, if you have a second, I'm curious about how you would characterize your relationship with the Port of Astoria, and what might your wish list be. Now, this may not be the proper forum for that, but I thought I'd just float that for a second.
I would say we're distant cousins. And we haven't had any family reunions for a long time.
Is there something that you would like the commission and the executive director to pay attention to or think about going forward, and what has been some of your criticisms about lack of respect that your cousins have not provided for you? Any thoughts or questions or statements?
To be honest, I don't even know how the port relates to Cannon Beach. I'm very ignorant
We pay
about it.
taxes.
Huh?
We
Well,
pay
other
taxes.
than that, I actually am like totally ignorant about it.
That's why I'm doing my homework, to see if I can be a conduit for someone in South County. If they had some questions, to answer your question directly, I'm not quite sure what the relationship is between, you don't have an airport, you don't have a port, you do pay taxes. There is an economic benefit to the county for the Port of Astoria as a economic driver and creating jobs. But those jobs seem to be in a little pocket at the mouth of the Columbia River. So
We used to get cruise ship buses.
you used to, or you was that due to the pandemic that kind of?
Yeah, I don't know where it's at now.
I don't think we have
It
many.
looks like we're going to have about 20 some ships between now and midsummer come into Astoria. We're trying to do some imaginative things to give the passengers something to increase their experience within certainly Astoria and what they've come to enjoy and love about Astoria. But getting them down to South County so they could spend some dollars, I think could be an admirable a target. So thank you for, bringing that one up.
Well, in the past, I know that I heard a lot of complaints from people on the cruise ships because I was working at the Rock. And they had like 20 minutes to come down and see the Rock and look at everything and go through the tide pools. So it's like ran down and ran back. And they were very disgruntled that they didn't get to spend a little more time on the beach here. I mean, that was the only connection I've ever had with the
Well, if
tour
we're
buses.
getting some tour buses that hopefully will be a little bit more efficient. And I think I will tell the gentleman on the port that interfaces with the cruise ships. Why don't you find out some of the people that want to come to maybe explore South County and certainly Haystack Rock as an icon to see if when they get off the ship, something's in place for them to boogie on down here and increase their experience and and loosen their checkbook.
I know there was a survey done, several years ago about the port's relationship with South County. You might want to check that out. I seem to remember the result, and I'm really foggy on it, but I seem to remember the result was that port gave South County or benefited the South County by about $3 million. Now, I don't know where
that went?
Yeah, where that went or how that was. And I think mostly they said it was employment, but I don't know. I don't know if I even actually read the survey. I never saw it. But
They tried to figure out the trickle down effect of cruise ships coming into town.
Yeah, and it wasn't just cruise ship, but it was employment. I think that was what they said. The major benefit of the port to South County was employment. And I'm not sure what they meant by employment exactly. Does that mean that somebody got a job and came down here and spent money, or somebody had a job that made another job available that made a South County job available? I don't know. But.
Well, one thing that I'm going to be discussing if I make it to this position is trying to figure out how to have some affordable living, maybe sponsored by the port and maybe Seaside. I know that some of your employees down here, it's tough for them to find some place to live, and they have to commute back and forth to Seaside, and the opportunities for living establishments are a little bit tough down there. The rents in this neck of the woods are something that is onerous for your support people. So maybe we can do something. I have been working with a gentleman who we've been talking to, an outfit in Oregon City who takes cans, the container cans off and converts them. It's really phenomenal what you get with a new can coming off of a boat and converting that into a 800 or 900 square foot living space that is insulated and plumbed, and so that would be awfully good for a lot of different footprints, and maybe that would be possible down there. So as far as employment, if we could do something to find living to assist the people that want to work down in Cannon Beach, that'd be great. Thank you for your time, and if you see my lawn signs, please don't knock them over. Thank you.
Mr. Lansing, could you please give us your mailing address?
My mailing address is 707 5th Avenue in Hammond, Oregon. And the zip in Hammond, Oregon is 97121.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Wincy. W. Or was his name Wincy with a W?
No, John Lansing.
Lansing.
Okay, any other public comment? Yes.
Hello, I'm Dana Hardwell, P O Box 1305, Cannon Beach. If you're on the planning commission, you've probably seen my name. I filed a couple of appeals related to wetlands. I just wanted to let you put a face with the appeals and let you know I'm so thankful that you're having this meeting. You're all gathering, talking about this. I've been trying to follow online, but I do agree it's an emergency situation. And again, very appreciative for the time you've all put into this and reviewing my appeals while I try to be thorough. It's difficult and it's been a fast learning curve for me, but again, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so I would like to thank the three individuals that got this moving. We've been talking about it for a long time and it's nice to get a document in front of us. So would like to start things.
I've been asked to start us off, and I hope that everyone will jump in as needed. Just to be sure for everyone that we all know what we're doing here. What we decided to do as a group, an informal group, was to begin thinking about what would it take to update our wetland provisions and our ordinances to bring us to a point that we are protecting wetlands at the level that our community desires and expects. For those of us on planning commission, this is a very immediate topic. We've been seeing a lot of issues surrounding wetlands, and the really tough part for us is knowing that our code does not provide the protection expected. So that was our initial impetus for the job, for taking this on. We really wanted to think about the science as we went through the code. So we were doing a lot of scientific research. We were saying, what does the wetland biology tell us about what protections are necessary and how to achieve that? I sent a memo out with the revised code that we have here. The revised code is purely suggestions. We've even had conversations since this red line version. We now have ideas for making it even better. So tonight will really be the broad brushstrokes. We're not talking about specific language because we have further revision to make. So what I'm hoping is that we can talk about the big picture. What does City Council and Planning Commission see as the big pieces that we want to change about the code? And then we can work with the language after that. So as I outlined, several of the major points in this revision include that non-conforming or prior uses will be exempted from the new provisions. This is a big deal because we're talking about increasing the buffer size. That means lots that previously would not have been affected by any wetland code might become affected. So we wanted to make sure we weren't being unfair. So that means if you have a house that now would be within a wetland buffer, the use of your house, the maintenance of your house remains the same. You can rebuild your house there. You can't make it bigger, but you can rebuild it. So that is, I want to be clear to start with that we're not cutting anybody out of what they currently have as we make these changes. The other change that we're proposing is to increase the wetland buffer. So a buffer is an area of land that surrounds the wetland. And the importance of the buffer is that this defines the application of these protections to areas that are not wetland, but are next to wetland. Right now, we have a 5-foot buffer zone. That means I'm taller than 5 feet. It's ridiculous. And the scientists that we've talked to at Department of State Lands, Department of Land Conservation and Development have sort of their jaws drop when we say that we have a 5-foot buffer. So we know that the 5-foot buffer is useless. And the problem with it is that we see applications coming in for permits that we know will affect a wetland, but we can't do much about it because the buffer is so small that that permit is outside of the buffer zone, even though it will still impact the wetland. So as we're talking about a buffer zone, we need to think what size area is necessary to capture any uses that might affect the wetland. That doesn't mean that we're saying nothing can happen there, but it says we need to have a buffer big enough that we can capture any potential impacts to wetlands. And I want to take just a minute to talk about our proposed new buffer width. So we've proposed a buffer width of 50 feet. This is in keeping with a lot of other buffer areas. City of St. Helens, for instance, has a buffer, what they call a protection zone, which is the same thing as a buffer of 50 feet for their sort of medium importance wetlands and 75 feet for their significant wetlands. State buffers are 50 feet for significant wetlands, so state of Oregon. If we go further north, the state of Washington has a variety of buffers. Their minimum buffer is 50 feet. That's for the lowest quality wetland. Their high quality wetlands get buffers of 300 feet. So this is to give you a sense of just how big a buffer can be. We picked 50 because we're going to try to go to 100, but this seems to be the buffer width that is most reasonable for a change that we're trying to make and still provides biological protection. We also are proposing to remove the ability to subdivide a wetland or a wetland buffer. So we can't chop the wetland into pieces. Instead, if you have a wetland, it gets to stay a whole wetland. We also would love to have a conversation about improving mitigation. Mitigation means sometimes we are going to have impacts to the wetland or the wetland buffer. And the question is, what can we do to make sure that the person who is putting in that permit is also doing something else to try to reduce the impacts of their use? Right now, the code as it is has a pretty weak mitigation section and most of it is subjective. So I think we've all talked about clear and objective standards. With mitigation, we have to really work hard to make sure that when we impose some form of mitigation, it's clear and objective and it's not subjective. So that's a lot of the language changes you see here have been aimed at trying to create a more clear and objective process for the mitigation. And then finally, we really wanted to make sure that we built in protection for trees and vegetation. We think of wetlands as, wet, muddy areas, but there's tons of vegetation there that is absolutely essential to the biological function of the wetland. And in fact, a lot of times that's woody plants. So it's not trees in the way that we think of trees necessarily, but it's also the willows and the other natives that are absolutely essential to biological function. So we want to make sure that when we're protecting the wetland, we're also protecting the vegetation around it. So I'm going to stop there and let people call out their comments. But if you have questions about our big picture plan, please, absolutely.
I'd like to add one thing, and that is this new ordinance doesn't say that if you own a lot of wetland, that you can't build a house on it. You can build a house on it. It's just that the house has to be on, if it's in the wetland itself or in the buffer, it has to be on stilts, which is what happens currently now about when you build a house in a wetland. So there's certain parameters various parameters the house has to meet, not taking away anyone's ability to build a house on their wetland. And that's in keeping with Measure 49, because Measure 49's the latest cases speak to the fact that if you're not being deprived of the use of your land, maybe you're being deprived of how big a house you want, but that's not use. Use is saying you can't build a house at all on this wetland, and we're not saying that. So I think that I think from that standpoint, because that seems to be a quick response from a lot of people as well. You're doing a takings or you're doing a Measure 49 thing, and we're not. And I think that's pretty clear.
So I have a question about existing homes. They have to keep the footprint the same.
Right. And obviously that's up for discussion if people feel that's somehow wrong, but it makes sense with the way that other non-conforming uses work. When there's a code revision to other parts of our code, the non-conforming use is you have your current footprint, current use, not expanded.
I think though, isn't there an exception if you completely tear down your house and rebuild it?
But I think
80% of its value, then you have to, I think, conform with the current existing code.
if you intentionally take it down.
Right.
So if it were to burn down,
That's different.
that's different.
But if you decide, oh, I don't like this house anymore, I want to rebuild it,
True.
want to rebuild it bigger. Well, you can't, because you can't just rip the house down and rebuild it. You have to stay within the original, actually, you have to conform to the current code. And that's true of the other parts of our code too.
Right.
So,
Basically, what we did was just referenced existing non-conforming and pre-existing use code
right.
in the Cannon Beach ordinances, so that this would be like any other code revision.
I was curious, getting back to what Lisa was saying about, we're not looking to prevent houses from being built, but I knew that there were specific requirements for houses being built within a wetland. I guess our buffer has always been so small that it just never crossed my mind. But so we're saying that if a house was to encroach on the buffer, it would have to meet the same requirements as if it were in the wetland currently?
There are some differences between the restrictions in a wetland, the delineated wetland versus in the buffer. But what we do is we say, if you have a lot that has, let's say, some wetland, some buffer, some upland, that means land that's not in either wetland or buffer, you need to preferentially build in the upland. If there is no space there, then you are given, I think we said 1,000 square feet footprint that you can put in the buffer preferentially. And even if you couldn't build in buffer, let's say you've got all wetland, then you could build on stilts and be.
Okay.
So basically, this makes sure that everyone can put a structure on a lot.
There's a size limit. If you're going to build in the wetland or that's in the ordinance.
And the ordinance mentions driveways and patios. So how are these interpreted in terms of the limit in size and coverage of a lot?
So that would be, the coverage would remain the same as the base zone, but they do have to be pervious surfaces. So it would have to be gravel or something that would allow water infiltration.
So you wouldn't have a cement patio. for
Exactly,
instance.
right.
I have a question.
Yes.
As part of the research that you all did on this, did you look at what other communities do in terms of the communities buying the wetlands and keeping them as dedicated wetlands? And is it something that has been presented to city council?
We did not go that far. It's a great idea. That didn't seem like something we could fit into a code revision, but I love the concept.
I think one of the problems with that is that land is so expensive here that even a 50 by 100 square foot lot is that has wetlands on it or significant a lot of wetlands. It's going to still be prohibitive cost wise. I mean, that's part of the problem. And land conservancies are not really interested in 1 acre parcels, or they're in larger parcels, unless we had some kind of a bank system that we had in place to purchase wetlands, which would be great. I mean, but at this point we don't, not to say we can't.
So I understand that land is very expensive, but I also think that there needs to be some thought into preserving some of the uniqueness of Cannon Beach, not for our generation, but for generations that come after us. Because at this pace that we're going at, there's going to be no open land in Cannon Beach. I think this is the time to be thoughtful about what can and cannot be afforded, preserve that.
Mickey, could we work something like that into maybe a mitigation bank? I mean, we could at least come back with a response to that. And I could see it working within the context of a code.
Yeah, I think we have to really ask ourselves, what wetlands do we have left that could be purchased? It's a nice concept.
There are a few of them left.
There's a few.
That are worth protecting.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really tough to integrate some sort of a purchase program into our code that would create a natural conflict of interest. But I do think that there is a room for another conversation. They are expensive, to your point, Lisa, but so is litigation, which at our time, which we've spent a lot of on as well.
Yeah.
But there is a cost benefit analysis to be done there. I don't think we can do it in our code and not,
Because the code has to be clear and objective too, and that would be very difficult. But
But that
I
doesn't
think,
mean it's not a worthwhile effort.
no, we
I
should.
think it's a great idea.
Should be at the table.
If we had that, we wouldn't even have to be sitting here worrying about it. I mean, yeah.
Big picture question about process. In your memo, well, first of all, thank you for doing this. The deep dive into wetlands, very important, definitely supportive, so very much appreciate it. In memo, you mentioned that the code revisions involving policy generally and wetlands specifically are outside the scope of Works audit process. I'm happy to see Marcy
That's right.
online. But is this outside of the scope of their work for the expanded?
Right, so if you read her memo from our last joint session, she said specifically she'd read through the wetland code, but was not proposing to make any changes there
Right.
because it really takes a deep dive. And
Right,
it's really a policy decision that the consultants can't walk in and say, well, here's what's best for your community. We as a community need to say, what do we want to see here? So that's why we felt that this is appropriate, the parallel track. Especially because just the process of going through these policy changes is going to take a lot of time. We have to go to the state, make the plan amendment, what is that, the PAPA? We have to do so much footwork. Aside from simply deciding what we're doing, just to get it into place, that if we start the process now, maybe it'll be done in a time that sort of fits with the reorganization that Work is doing, and it can just be, set into to that.
my understanding of their scope of work is essentially the audit is being wrapped up now, which is no changes but cleaning up the code. And then the next phase is the changes to that. So, I mean, I would hope that they would be involved in this
for sure.
conversation.
For sure, yeah. And I think especially without Jeff here to guide it.
Yeah.
I envision that they would be sort of, they step in to be that Jeff style as a planner. Here's what you need to know. Here's what we can do next.
Yes.
Robert, not to take away a job, but I have a feeling like you have enough to do already. And we did have a really excellent conversation with Amanda Punton, who is the wetland specialist for DLCD. She gave us a lot of information about how this process looks when we come to them and what they need to see in order to, accept the code revision. So there's definitely going to be a lot of
Work left, more than I had
right.
envisioned, really. I mean, I was a little bit disappointed when we spoke to her because I thought, oh my goodness, we're just right at the beginning.
Well, it might help us think about what we want to accomplish now versus what we want to accomplish long-term. Maybe some of these changes that we bring in now, we know as a group, we're going to have to come back to this, but these are the things that we can do, we put in place now that will address the most egregious.
I think that, you have to have a public notice process and we still have to get an okay from the state, even, I don't think we could.
It's the same regardless of whether it's a small change or a big change.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge, long process. It involves all these other agencies. So we're just going to have to do it. I mean, that's what we're coming to you for, is for you to tell us if you want us to go forward and keep, if this is the direction you'd like us to go, and then we'll try and get through the process.
Any idea what that timeline looks like?
The review, even with them, is I think 60 days. Robert, you may know this. 60 days once they need it for 60 days.
Maybe,
Yeah.
I'm just not sure. I haven't actually done anything like this yet.
Yeah. They need it for 60 and 90 days, then we get it back to pass through planning commission, city council, and however long that takes.
And public notice and public hearing, all those things have to happen.
And that's once we have a actual language that we agree on.
I would offer as an option, we can wait until the code audit has time to pick up the issue and wait another 12 months after that. So, I know Lisa wanted to posture this as, are you telling us to go forward? But the reality is I don't see that we have a choice. If we want to protect the wetlands.
I didn't follow what you said at all.
I thought your comment was, we're here to ask, is this something you want us to invest in? Now,
If this rewrite,
yeah. And I think my comment was that we wait for the appropriate time. It's gonna be 12 months later than that, and then the process looks the same.
this is the appropriate time because we already decided as a group that this was one of the emergency issues facing us. Because,
I don't want to wait 12 months.
yeah, if we waited
Yes.
to even talk about it for 12 months, we wouldn't even, there's nothing to talk about because every single lot that contains a wetland will be built on by then, or at least plans will be submitted.
Who would take the lead on the process with the state? And I mean, it seems like that's a city, but we don't have a city planner right now.
Or Robert.
So
Robert.
that's something.
Technically, we do have a city planner. I am a planner.
But
I'm not a community development director, so I'm not a management supervisor level position, but technically we do have a staff planner. So there is some capability that we have to handle some of that process internally. And also, if through working with HerbsWorks, if they do bring in an outside consultant, let's say they bring in a specialized environmental planner, that person could potentially take the lead on that as well.
First of all, I did not mean to, I was actually thinking more about not loading what feels like a really big onerous project on top of whatever it is you find yourself doing during the day. But I didn't think it was a planning commission effort. This would be something that we need to make sure we've got the capability of doing, but I agree, it's important. And I don't want to wait either.
And Marcy, anytime you want to interject anything, let us know.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Uh-huh.
Maybe after my next question. Go ahead, Marcy.
At the last, hi there, everybody. At the last meeting, I believe that I heard HerbsWorks should be looking at potentially augmenting our team to ramp up our capacity to maybe go faster on the code audit, also to address this issue, wetlands, with additional technical support in our team, and also maybe tree preservation. So I've been looking at candidates that we might use to fill out our team a little bit. And I also think we talked about that while the code reorganization is happening, we might have some time to discuss how these additional topics could be addressed when we get to the policy portion of the code rewrite. That's a specific phase that happens toward the end of our work. So I don't know if that helps you. I hear what you're saying about needing maybe staff and or technical support through the consulting team of HerbsWorks to address this issue. So I heard that and we're looking at it.
Right.
Did you want to?
Yeah, and what Marcy just said was the direction that I took from the meeting that we had. And we talked to her, she's trying to go ahead and pull together a team for it. And so if it's going to be HerbsWorks, it would be HerbsWorks working with Robert. And that was also the purpose of asking, I believe I asked you all, would it be all right if Marcy attended this meeting, and that's why she's on.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
But I think what we have to do tonight really is tell us what you'd like to see changed, what language you'd like to see changed, or how you feel about what your thoughts are on the language that's there, the changes that are made. And they're not complete because after our talk earlier this week, some more issues came to light that we have to address. But at least as far as we've gotten, if you like what you see or you have ideas about it, or that's what we need tonight so we can have a final product sometime soon.
I have some specific questions when we get there.
Yeah, I think, Brandon, did you want to say something?
Yeah, and I'll just be brief about it. And I'm sorry if I missed it in the draft. Is there consideration for the levels and grades of wetlands within the proposed?
Yes, so that has been an ongoing conversation. We as a city will need to decide what our approach is. So state law requires us to protect significant wetlands. We have urban wetlands and they are really, really important to us as a city. But if we compare them to the statewide process of saying what's significant or what's not, these are not as biologically healthy as a rural wetland. So most of these, if not all, would not count as significant for state purposes. So we as a city need to designate what's significant to us. So we can do that on a number of criteria. We can say this is important to us because it's flood control, which is legitimately a concern, especially as storms get stronger. We can say this is important to us as wildlife habitat. This is important to us for our community well-being. Any one of these, we as a city will need to designate and state why we consider which wetlands significant to be covered under the code. Currently, every wetland in the local wetland inventory is protected under our code. So we could go that direction. We could say we're going to just protect anything that is in our local wetland inventory. It's all significant because. But when we go to the state, we're probably going to need to have our plan and understand why we're protecting whatever decision we make about what gets protected.
Like relating back to goal 5, that's the way we have to relate this to goal 5.
Or we could relate it to water quality, which would be goal 6,
Yeah,
or even goal 7 flooding.
right. And
We have to relate it to one of those.
yeah, so I mean, but we, in a weird way, we're kind of grandfathered in for just a safe harbor because that's what we have already.
Okay,
And so we're wondering, we are ourselves are trying to figure out whether that safe harbor grandfathering will prevent us from having to spend a lot of money to do a very, very sophisticated analysis of our wetlands we have remaining. And so we don't know the answer to that yet because we hear different things from different state agencies and we're still trying to parse through it all.
okay.
So the existing wetland survey dates back to 1993 and I know no new data. I know the current wetland zones and lots of record are based on that study and it does have low, medium and high significant rankings that were valid 30 years ago now. Is there any benefit to going back to that document? Because that process, if you read through the document, envisioned, buffered of significantly more than 5 feet. And I don't know why that didn't happen.
So when I spoke with Dan Carey at Department of State Lands, he said that the current process for evaluating wetlands is different.
I wouldn't.
So when you look at the standards that were used for that original local wetland inventory, they wouldn't measure significance the same way if you went back and redid it. So as Lisa said, it would be time consuming and expensive to have a new inventory done. That is, of course, what Department of State Land said. They said, well, you should have a new inventory. And we said, well, maybe someday. So what we do right now, as you well know, is that if someone has a wetland on their property, they have a delineation done, and then that becomes new data upon which we assess that particular property. So to be honest, at this point, I would guess the number of the wetland lots of record have a more recent wetland delineation than that local wetland inventory. And apparently, when that inventory was done, a lot of it was done by guesswork, so to speak, because the biologists didn't have approval to go onto a lot of people's land. So they would look from the outside. He said they would literally look over a fence and they'd say, oh, well, I think I see something that's a wetland here. I'm guessing it's about this size. So it was not a terribly specific inventory, but it was what they could do at the time.
Fair enough. It feels like what the folks of this city want is all wetlands protected.
Yes, that seems.
Not a-
We
Not
don't
a
have many.
seriatim of things.
It's not like there's a lot to choose from, to be honest.
I have another big picture question, but preface it by saying I've been involved in wetland conservation efforts for probably 30 years and I support this. I'm also concerned about code changes that could unintentionally perpetuate some of our current housing issues. So my question is, will increasing wetland buffers from 5 to 50 feet create unintended consequences that may put us in danger of discouraging desired development, middle housing, multifamily?
I know where you're going, and
Okay.
for instance, right now, the way our code reads, if we don't change it, is you get one residential dwelling unit. So we have changed that to be one structure, which could then be multifamily. And I know that Marcy said, one of the really important things is, of course, to bring our code up to standard with state requirements. Don't limit to single family residential, because that's not allowed. So actually what we've proposed in the language opens up the possibility of a structure that houses more than one family. Right now, we don't.
Appreciative of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyway, right now, you are allowed your one unit on a wetland lot of record. So I think this actually improves
Okay,
our ability to offer housing rather than decreases it. Yes, it's a larger buffer, but most of those homes that are in that larger buffer part are already built.
I hope as we continue this process, we will be looking at issues like that. And if
Yes.
150 feet to me sounds like it could make some kind of, I hate to refer to any wetlands as marginal, but some of those lower levels, smaller, not really providing historic wetland function, preventing what we need as a community.
Yeah, and this will, like I say, again, this is an overlay on the subzone. So once Marcy and her team has fixed our underlying zoning so that we aren't precluding multifamily housing, then this isn't going to somehow come in and change that.
You were ready for me.
We're trying to think of everything.
I have some specific questions on language that I
Sure,
could start.
of course. Go ahead.
Okay.
Let me pull out my,
So. Let me get the section for you here. 17.43.050 standards.
yes,
Oh, section 7. Spraining, diverting water from or reconfiguring the dimensions of a wetland to create upland shall be treated the same as fill removal. Doing this would apply to situations like forest lawn. Now, it doesn't refer here to the wetland buffer. Unless it does as far as requirements for fill and removal.
so
Is that-
the beginning of this section 050 does define that these standards apply to wetland buffers and wetlands. So
Okay, so the whole section,
this whole section refers to both,
okay,
unless otherwise specifically stated, but for instance, this would refer to both.
okay. And that would preclude an individual or the city from conducting a project there.
If there's reason to drain it. Now, if they have upland area that they can use, they get to use that upland area. So this is really saying you can't affect the wetland itself by deciding to make it smaller, which seems to me like exactly what the community has been asking us to do.
Oh, let's see, 7 B2. This is where you talk about adjusting the size of the lot where you subtract the portion of the wetland portion of any. So I'm reading that as if you're building it in all wetlands, you're limited to 1,000 square feet.
Yes,
And that would be including a garage.
but you get 2 stories.
That's the footprint. So that's lot coverage. It's not
It's not.
floor area ratio.
It's not the total size of the home.
Yeah,
So it's 2,000 square feet. If we could
Gotcha.
assume a 2-story building.
thank you.
And we had a really good conversation about Corvallis, which uses something called, let me just look it up.
Yeah.
It's the minimum assured development area, and it's a much cleaner way of doing what we did here. So we're gonna
Say
be,
that again?
so it's the minimum assured development area. It's their way of making sure that you have some minimum buildable area on your lot. We liked the language there a lot better. We found out about it after we sent you this. So I foresee that B2 will be changed dramatically to be much cleaner, easier to read, and to be more like code that we know has already been approved.
Yeah, that was,
Because the other thing we want to do is make sure we're following a model that works.
that was my comment. Is there some way of saying this simply?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It was,
Right now, it's a labyrinth.
yes. Yeah. So I promise improvements there.
Same section C1. Shall buildings shall be placed on piling or on posts in a manner that allows the free flow of water underneath the structure. No fill material may be used for commercial buildings in wetland buffer areas. So I'm wondering how that would apply to a situation like First and Spruce, where we've got kind of the wetland, which is in the ditch area alongside the road, and then a little bit in the south corner of that property. So does that mean whatever is built there with the 50-foot buffer has to be built on pilings?
Well, we're too late
Yeah.
on that.
Late on that.
We're too late on that
We got-
project. Because that project, the
And-
permit has already been approved,
Okay.
so we can't do anything about it. We can't apply this retroactively.
Right. I don't know, maybe it's the only example of that, but I was just trying to relate when something has a small portion of wetland and you've got 150-foot buffer.
It's only
Does it-
50 foot, by the way, not 150.
Sorry, misspoke. Yeah, that.
Really don't capture the headline.
I think we'll all accept 150.
Yeah, to make it 150, I think the community is gonna applaud for you.
So I don't know if I need to rephrase my question. to
No, so
not
I
be
think
about
I
First and
understand.
Spruce, But
You're concerned that if you are, say, your lot is 50 feet wide and you're all buffer, you're saying, why should you have to be on pilings?
And is this saying that the entire structure needs to be on pilings, or can just that portion that's impacting the actual wetland be on pilings?
We're saying that 50 feet does impact the actual wetland. That's why it's the 50-foot buffer.
So the gravel parking lot, we would require
Right.
posts.
Because the way the buffer is working is that it is feeding the wetland. So if we starve the buffer, the only water making it into the wetland is what falls directly over the wetland. And the problem is the wetland shrinks in that case because wetlands really depend on runoff. And in fact, we're already really constraining most of the wetlands in this city, but we don't want to see any further constraints. So we want to be sure that there's a way for drainage to make it all the way to the wetland.
I think Robert wanted to say.
Robert, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna point out regarding First and Spruce and the development permit. We do have an active appeal on that development permit.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, that'll be coming before the planning commission in April.
Oh, I didn't know that.
How many units are proposed for that area?
I believe a total of 5 residential. I'd have to go back and get the plans, but I want to say it was 5 residential were proposed.
Is it multifamily? Is it, I understood one time it was single family and then a multifamily complex?
It's a mixed use. There would be 5 dwelling units in it, so it depends on how you're interpreting,
I see.
the way we define multifamily.
But it's not workforce housing. There's no mention in that permit at all of workforce housing or middle income housing. It's just housing.
Understanding is that it would be market rate.
On C2. In section, lot coverage will be minimized, commercial development in wetland buffer areas subject to site design review pursuant to chapter. Are we in danger of moving a lot of properties into site design review in this case?
I don't think there's much commercial near wetlands.
No, there's a couple, I think. There's one up on Elk Creek, I think. But no, I can't see how that would be an issue.
And again, if it's existing,
Yeah.
it's
It's
grandfathered in. So we're only talking about lots that are not currently
Yeah.
built and are also zoned commercial. So you can imagine there's not a lot of commercial that hasn't been developed already in the city.
And I apologize for my
No, this is what we
I-
want.
lack of land use expertise, but that's why I'm glad.
Exactly what we're here for.
they're good questions.
Absolutely. Right.
I don't want to, no, I'm not finished, but I don't want to dominate all the time, so you can come
No, I
back to
think
me if
that,
you
no,
want.
I mean, is there anybody else that has a pressing question?
Not pressing. I've got a couple, but
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all.
Keep going, but cut me off if I'm.
I do have one question that's in that same area here.
Yeah.
On C3, it says, driveways, parking, utilities, landscaping, accessory structures, and that's plural. But as I understand it, you're talking about just one structure. So what,
And I think actually we missed, this probably would read differently based on some other changes we made, and we missed that little section. So I'm going to mark it as, make sure that it's consistent with the other changes we made, because I think this is not consistent.
Same section D1, and it may be just a repeat question of my last, but new accessory structures or buildings shall be placed on pilings or posts in a manner that allows the free flow of water beneath the structure. No fill material may be used for an accessory structure or building in a protected wetland or in a wetland buffer. So accessory structures 50 feet away from wetlands must go on pilings. So,
And as you notice, this used to read may. So that
Yes.
was already anticipated that people might wish to do that. We're saying not only if you wish to, but you must.
yeah.
So this is not a big change from what was already there.
Yeah, again, I was trying to wrap my head around some of these. I think of North Hemlock Street with the birdhouses, which I love. And some of them have accessory structures. And I was just wondering, they're at grade level.
We actually owned one of those houses, and I will tell you that we had things underneath, and every winter they all got washed away. Every single time there was a lot of water flowing through those properties. So having something up on pilings makes a lot of sense if you're trying to protect it on one of those lots. Even if it's your accessory building.
I don't know the address, but this one is definitely closer to the road.
Yeah.
But all that stuff would be required to be on pilings,
Right.
even if
It's new construction,
It's new.
not
Right.
what's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
E2, the driveways. What was my question on that one? Does that have contradictory statements in it? Driveways in protected air and protected wetlands or wetland buffer areas shall be placed on piling or on fill in a manner that allows the free flow of water beneath the road or driveway. Pile supported construction is required. So we talk about they must be placed on fill, but it's required to have them on pilings. So am I missing something in that?
No, this sentence can be deleted.
Yeah.
We could delete the sentence.
So it is, okay. And I noticed that one also. It's the editor in me, I'm sorry. It seemed like we're trying to get away from protected wetlands and just talk about wetlands and wetland buffer
So the
areas.
reason for
And
that is that the previous code would have allowed things like driveways on the wetland itself. In an earlier provision here, we said, no, we don't want to see driveways on the wetland. You don't get to your driveway across the middle of the wetland. That's why here, a lot of times in this section, the standard section, where they said in protected wetlands, you see that deleted because we're saying you don't have the option. It's not a choice.
so it sounds like you'd need to delete the reference to fill in that first sentence. And in the second sentence, well, no, it's. Yeah, in the second sentence as well.
Well, it says overfill.
Yeah.
And then water circulation shall be facilitated. Again, that's kind of not applicable if we're building on post, I would think, but.
We'll take a look at your section. Thank you.
I'm almost at the end of my list.
Oh, my goodness, I can't believe it.
I know. I think it's K2. It refers to projects. What page?
Not have a.
17. Oh, 17 of the packet. Sorry. It's page 17 of the council packet. Projects in protected wetlands or wetland buffer areas may be approved. Better at sec.
Not the pack.
What are projects?
So it means anything that is listed previously as a use that is either outright or is a conditional use.
Okay.
So basically what this says, if you have a permit to do something in a wetland or a wetland buffer, you must mitigate if you impact the area. And then it goes through the steps for that mitigation. What we're talking about here when we say a mitigation plan, we're saying actually developed by a biologist, not just somebody saying, oh, hey, I'll put up some fences, but actually having a biologist say, here are the things that would be necessary to mitigate this impact to this wetland.
And I feel like that we could go much deeper on mitigation. We're just scratching the surface. It's really hard to get exact, well, I guess because each wetland is different, it's hard to get, to make it clear and objective. So we're looking for ways to do that, which is going to take some work. Yes.
Yeah. And certainly when we talk to the wetland biologists, they gave us a list of, well, sometimes this is helpful, sometimes that, but it depends on the wetland. It depends on the surrounding vegetation. So that's why we say we as a city should just make sure that every project has biologist oversight.
Yeah.
And if you want to get consistent with the protected wetlands text, it appears there as well.
Where are you looking?
That's in, what was it, K2 that we were just talking about?
So here, you're right. We do want to make sure that if there is an impact, for instance, if you had a lot that was entirely wetland and you were allowed to build a house on it, you have no other option. We want to make sure that you are mitigating your impact to the wetland itself. So with driveways, we're saying you don't get to put a driveway on a wetland, but because of the takings measure 49 issue, you can always put one structure on your lot, one residential structure, and that could be multifamily or not, just as long as it's one structure. So in that case, we want to make sure that's mitigated if it turns out that the only usable space on your lot is a protected wetland.
Okay, in that case, we want to use protected wetland.
So here we're intentionally
you.
keeping that, exactly.
Yes, I got one other. So, A4A. I think maybe it's just self-explanatory. As far as the compensatory buffer mitigation shall replace those buffer functions lost from development are we just talking about making sure the drainage returns to the wetland?
Right, or maybe you're saying, you're gonna impact this corner of the wetland, but over here, there's something that could be done to improve the quality of the wetland buffer. So even though you're impacting this portion of the buffer, it may be that on the same property, there's something that can be done to actually improve
Yeah.
biological function. So in that case, you would come in and say, well, I'm actually improving something here to make up for the impact that I'm creating in a different space.
Okay,
I
thank you.
I had a couple of questions about that particular paragraph too, because it looks like there's a couple of words missing and I wasn't sure.
This is on A, 4A.
Yeah,
Okay.
or A, it says, compliance, let's see, where am I? Compliance with the mitigation plan issuing a certificate. Do you mean before issuing a certificate of occupancy?
You're on 3A.
Sure, but I see where you are.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see, comprised by percent package. Firm compliance. Yeah, I think you're right. It should be before issuing.
And then,
prior to.
down below, it says, the owners or, let's see. Yeah, the owners or owner's agents agreement in exchange granting. Do you mean for granting?
Yes, exactly.
And then, of course, it's.
Here's the editor and Nancy.
Yeah. And it's misspelled. I did have another back. Talking about excavation.
Where are you?
I'm not sure. Let me see. Oh, here it is. It's on for our packet. It's on page 14. It is 5H.
Is in 050, yeah.
All right.
Footpath.
Bicycle paths shall be constructed of permeable material, and then there's an H. And it talks about excavation to deepen wetland areas. I think this is when you're talking about improvement of wetland areas.
H is a new paragraph there. Starts over,
Excavation, protected wetlands and wetland buffer areas.
Well, it's.
Yeah.
You got five, they got H.
Okay, I'm there.
Anyway, at the front of the ordinance, you say no excavation is allowed. And then here you say excavation to deepen wetland areas, and then you talk about more excavation for posts and so forth. So
For the, I think that first, if you were doing some wetland enhancement and that required, for instance, some kind of excavation for a beneficial purposes, that would be here. Now, again, we have to also keep remembering, what if there were that lot that was all wetland and someone was going to build on it, because there's no other buildable area, and then we want to, cover things like, all right, they're going to be on pilings. What kind of excavation will be required to do that? Now, let's all also note that anytime there is activity in a protected wetland or in a wetland, that is going to go to the state. And they're going to have a dredge and fill permit. The state will have to approve it, and the state will definitely require mitigation. And it would be state level mitigation. Whether it's a mitigation bank or some other process, it'll be the state that decides that, the Department of State Lands. So it's really out of our hands in terms of mitigation once that happens, but our code just needs to be consistent so that we aren't running afoul of state requirements.
And then speaking of mitigation, I remember many years ago, it used to be, and I don't know that it applies to the wetlands that we have here. But mitigation, some people could build a development on a wetland and mitigate another wetland.
Yes.
And when you talk about mitigation in this particular ordinance, do you mean mitigation of that particular wetland, or do you mean mitigation?
Yes.
There's a good reason for that.
Right. So this is definitely an important conversation. And we actually started this a little bit at one planning commission meeting. Yes, there are two ways to go with wetland mitigation. You can do local mitigation, or you can pay into some kind of bank that will mitigate offsite. And this is a conversation we should have as a group. What do we want to see done? We ultimately, for several reasons, felt that it was better not to try to go the mitigation bank route. First, What about Cannon Beach?
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to pay off and then suddenly we don't have any wetlands left here. Second, there aren't that many wetlands left anywhere nearby that we could pay to save. So it's sort of like you could be banking a lot of money and maybe never doing anything good with it. It's just so easy to pay off if there's a process for that. And so we wanted to keep our mitigation local, if at all possible, but obviously that's a conversation we need to have. That was just how the direction we went here, is to say mitigation should be done to the impacted area.
Does that mean that you could maybe build on, say, on Forest Lawn and mitigate the wetland on First and Spruce?
The way that we've written this, we're saying you need to mitigate where you are.
Where you are,
So
okay.
if you impact one part of Forest Lawn, you're going to need to do a lot of improvements in the other parts.
Right. And when we had that talk by Cameron, if I remember
Yes.
correctly, she really discouraged the idea of offsite mitigation. It really, it's very hard to monitor. Number one, how do you monitor it? We don't have a wetlands staff person.
They can do it because they have obviously staff dedicated to this. They have a huge area that they can create a bank in. And we actually, our area is not covered by any of the state banks. We as a city, I just can't imagine how we would staff that process.
Right. So,
But it does allow for offsite mitigation.
The way that we've written this, we're saying mitigation is local to the project. So you're improving your buffer, you're improving that wetland, you're enhancing something.
on that property, on that wetland on a record.
That obvious, that's.
Maybe we need to
Local, because
clarify
that's why I had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's the labyrinth language of our old, I mean, we're working with our old students and it's hard to follow. I get lost in sometimes in a paragraph. I do.
Yeah, there were a
Yeah.
several of those in here, but I think it really needs to be spelled out a little more.
Okay.
That's why I asked the question. I was
No, that's
really
perfect.
confused.
That's a
This is
good
exactly
suggestion.
the feedback we need.
Mickey, the resource, the expert resource for this mitigation plan and helping us, who is that? Is that something that y'all have discovered?
Do you mean in an individual project's mitigation plan
So-
or our bigger picture?
So, I mean, so we're going to require a mitigation plan. That would not be me putting it together. It would be somebody with credentials.
Right, so the
You know
way
who
that
those
you,
are?
so it would be the way that you hire someone to do a wetland delineation. So one of the local companies that does wetland delineations, they have biologists who could say, here's what we suggest for mitigating impacts to this wetland on this site.
Okay,
And it makes it a nice specific plan. Because they can look at the current conditions of that wetland and say, here are things that could be done to enhance it.
and they have the right qualifications for that.
Right, they're wetland biologists.
It does touch on something that I was concerned about too. And this is just trying to get the language as clear and objective.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just for one example, in D1, we use the language, and I realize this is layover from existing code. D1, a qualified individual. I think
Yeah.
that should probably be more narrowly defined.
I think definitely.
Additionally, and I'm not sure exactly where this is in our process, but I know in some instances around trees, the city has the right to bring their arborist in for basically a second opinion. Probably ought to have some language like that here, where, you know, the way it's written now, any person that has that tag can come in, regardless of how knowledgeable they are of our area. You have to accept it as basically our new map. So the city should have an option in here to have their wetland specialist come in and validate whether it's a plan, the wetland boundaries or something like that, but it should be a stopgap in a way. I didn't mean to take away from you.
No, and that's. It's just, I feel like the mitigation plan and is such a critical part of this.
Mhm. No, we are open to suggestions on improving the language.
I mean, I don't know, in a broader sense, you know, what requirements the city code has for any of the expert services that we require. To be honest with you,
There's not much, right?
they're good.
Robert could
No, you keep seeing the phrase qualified individual,
Right.
and what is that?
Not hardly clear and objective,
Right.
That is a fair point.
you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think, yeah. So I think my point is made. I just was curious if you had discovered resources that I wasn't aware of.
No, we don't know the individuals that we would name and say, these people.
Can I-
It'd be nice if there were a certification.
It would,
Good.
yeah.
That you could reference, and I don't know that.
Can I follow up on the
Sure.
offsite mitigation thing? I do see some benefit to offsite mitigation. And it's something we should consider, though I'm not sure how many areas it would apply to, but the one that comes to mind is I don't even know what year. It's been probably 20 years that we had a shovel-ready project for mitigation to return the north side of Ecola Creek to more of a natural state after all the fill. And we got ODOT money, and anyone who's seen the difference between what the north side of the creek used to look like and what it looks like now, I think there's a big case for certainly that one being a great local mitigation project. So I'm not sure we want to take that off the table. Although maybe there's not another project like that.
I'm just trying to picture where else. I need to spend some time with the wetland map.
It might,
If there is an option like that.
it might be existing stream corridors or that are in the right of way. I'm thinking it would obviously be public.
Right,
That, if we're going to be concerned about saving wetlands, we might also want to be looking at how we can improve existing wetlands on city property.
right. No, I think it's a consideration we should make.
Sorry, are you talking about mitigating offsite?
Right, so Gary was saying that he doesn't want to take completely off the table offset mitigation if it's local. So that if there are wetlands in Cannon Beach that could be improved, especially if it's on public property, that's actually could be beneficial.
And my example is where we looked at the difference on the north side of Ecola Creek, where the channels were carved and it's returned much more to a natural estuary.
Right, but I mean, I think that should just be a policy not hooked into offsite mitigation. I think that I feel really strongly that offsite mitigation, given the amount of wetlands we have in the city, is just not a good option. And that maybe our policy should be to, just in general, should be to improve the wetlands on city property, not connected with offsite mitigation.
Yeah, I'm not sure what circumstance.
And because I don't think a private property owner necessarily can go onto city property and decide they're going to mitigate. I mean, I think it'd be very confusing if you could mitigate on city property. I don't see how that
It would obviously be, again, having shovel-ready projects identified that we would execute.
The one you're referring to, Gary, was a CREST project. And so
ODOT mitigation money.
I'm not sure how the money flowed. I just know they were in charge of getting the work. So I'm just not entirely clear about how that would actually serve as a mitigation project.
It was identified as a shovel-ready project. Doug Dewar was the project manager of it.
But it was going to get done. It wasn't done as mitigation for a building on wetlands.
It was done as ODOT mitigation. We got state money through that mitigation bank.
Yes, I understand.
Okay. I just still don't feel.
There's another project out by north of the recycling center on the 101 right of way that got, in my opinion, a cursory mitigation. But there was a definite benefit that the property was improved. And it occurred in a wetland, so it's not the only time that's occurred. I'm still just not entirely understanding how what you're suggesting works into it.
I don't know. I don't know what circumstance would push something into being an offsite mitigation, what kind of situation that might be. I guess I'm just saying I think we have a need for some
I agree.
existing wetland.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I've seen it work and make a big difference.
I guess maybe if we are the offsite mitigation and it happens
Yeah.
to us. But that means somebody else's wetland somewhere else was degraded.
Yeah, and again, I can't think of the circumstance where it wouldn't make sense for them to mitigate a wetland, but it might make a bigger difference in an existing project or a potential project.
I mean, I kind of think it's apples and oranges you're talking about, though. We're talking about offsite mitigation for someone building something on a wetland lot of record. And you're talking about the need to improve existing wetlands. And I think that's a separate policy that has nothing to do with mitigating what you're doing to your wetland on your property. I think those should be enhanced anyway, regardless of whether you mess up a wetland somewhere else.
Yeah, I think I was thinking exactly the same thing. You're making a great case for having shovel-ready projects in case outside money becomes available. If that were to happen again, it would be a great thing for the community. But be able to really look at a specific project and point to this is what got improved in as a mitigation, I think has got a lot of benefit. They're kind of two separate things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, and it could be two separate things, and I don't want to keep pushing this because I like to keep this moving, but if there is a situation that offsite mitigation is going to improve a marginal wetland, it might be more in the community's interest to have offsite mitigation. I'll end it there.
I think I like the fact that you've brought up saying we need to reconsider carefully. And we need to make sure that we don't feel that there isn't a space in some instance in which that would fit well. And I really appreciate you trying to think, how do you fund future enhancements?
Right.
And I'm sorry, how does the committee prefer to be addressed? Wetland committee?
Well, we're not official.
We're not a
No.
social club.
Fine.
Wetland social club.
My question is, have you given any consideration to whatever wetlands exist in the urban growth boundary to inform how you're writing the text for the changes?
So we're talking about the local wetland inventory, which is mostly within the urban growth boundary. We haven't tried to distinguish what's inside or outside.
Okay.
Because we're assuming we have no say over what happens outside.
Do you have a suggestion though, Brad?
Well, it's just forward thinking.
Mhm.
The urban growth boundary is there for
They
a
change,
reason.
right?
And that, the current thinking, at least this is my interpretation of how we as a council, the planning commission feel, is that there hasn't been an express need to move the city boundaries. But there is an urban growth boundary, and I just wonder whatever occurs in that, maybe that should inform the decision in the event that things do move to that.
Do we have any
But-
control now over it? We shouldn't. Isn't it all county?
Oh, county.
It is, but it at some point could become. And then, of course, the rules will become, if this is written carefully. My point is there a specific wetland out there?
Outside, right, that if it
that you
became in the
have an eye
boundary,
on? Know how it
Mhm.
is possibly, is it needed to be treated differently. So would that inform the way you would
Right.
write the?
I think that's a good point. We should just make sure that there's not.
Like, I don't know, if
Wetlands.
that means nothing.
For instance, in the, well, South Wind side is not within the city limits yet. It's still part of the urban.
Exactly.
And there may be a wetland in that because there's a former stream bed there, isn't there?
I'm thinking of like lowland area behind the RV park,
Mhm.
Carmen Spider's property,
Right.
you know,
Oh.
stuff east of the highway.
Yeah,
Anything in the Ecola Creek drainage gonna have, at some point, there's,
Her property isn't in the city limits? Carmen's?
it is, she
Oh.
owns other property
Oh, okay.
across the highway.
Oh, okay.
then we should make sure that we've considered the ramifications.
Good point.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. I'll be kind of quick. These are kind of along the lines of, some of them are along the lines of clear and objective. In 1743-020. 1A1, buffer average. I didn't think that was clear enough. It'd be great to have a little bit more, and maybe that Corvallis code that you were talking about will
Yeah.
clear that up some.
Yeah.
Um,
We should do, I'll make sure we define it. It's kind of a term of art. So
yeah. Same master section sub C. This was the one that had my attention on the, if a wetland comes to the city, that is now the new gospel. Then where it reads, where the wetland delineation or delineation is prepared, the mapping it shall contain, the mapping it contains shall replace that of this Cannon Beach local inventory. It would be nice for us to have some safeguard there just to make sure that we weren't stuck with
their delineation. But
their delineation becomes our delineation.
The fact that the delineation has to be done by a, a certified wetlands biologist or
qualified.
a qualified wetlands biologist or something. Yeah.
Seen that?
Safeguards are always good.
Just a couple more. Let's see. This is a big section. Well, it's under the stormwater management.
Yes, so that's 050,
Isn't it?
I think.
Okay. Okay, so then J. And subsection 5 under J. Where the Public Works Director determines that wastewater volumes are or will be significant, wastewater management systems must disperse wastewater rather than discharging at a single point. First, I wondered if this was for, I wasn't entirely clear what this was for, but I thought maybe this is for septic systems.
No, it's stormwater only.
Okay, because we use stormwater in one section and wastewater in another, and they're obviously very, well, I shouldn't say obviously, they could be interpreted very differently.
Good, we could fix that.
Yeah.
We just place it with stormwater.
And then what I would say along that line is with stormwater management, I don't know that it's in our, we'd be ready to do this, but that management plan, it'd be nice to have more specifics on it.
Mhm.
Hopefully it's in the Corvallis plan, but I think it's probably a ton of work to figure that out. But one thing we know, one thing we've seen is that you can really harm the function of a wetland by taking the stormwater that's on that site, as you said, that falls on that site and putting it into our stormwater system. So I didn't see it specifically addressed. It doesn't mean it's not in here, where the stormwater needs to clear up that ambiguity that we currently are dealing with, that the city's building code says stormwater has to be, you can't put it on your neighbor's property. This should address.
And so, we talked about this a lot in our last meeting, that J3 stormwater runoff must be directed to the same drainage system. Do you feel like that is sufficient, or would you like to see that strengthened?
I think we need to have something even more specific. It won't be put into the sewer system or into the stormwater sewer system. It will be, as weird as that is right now, the way the code is written, that language isn't clear.
Let's talk about what that is. Are you talking about stormwater that is currently dumping into a wetland?
I'm talking about the roof that has the gutters and the pipes that come down. Right now, the way the code is written, does have to be, a neighbor could come or someone else could come in and say, hey, you have to take that into the storm sewer system. I don't know.
It's going on to their property. So.
What if the wetlands and neighboring? So I think there should be, again, where you have those close lot lines,
Yeah, we have to address that.
I think that'd be pretty important to
Yeah.
touch on that.
Can I interject one thought? So, on that one, so is there any need for consideration on how that water could or should be reintroduced into the wetland? It feels really ambiguous to me right now.
We could put more in there.
And we talk about point sources being good, or maybe they're bad, or I don't even know what a bioswale is, but apparently that's better. It feels like maybe if we want to have the water reintroduced, we maybe want to
Do it the right way.
how to do it.
Yeah, we got a lot of guidance in that packet, so we should look at that.
Good point. We could definitely.
That was just for me.
Great.
I had a question on that 17.43020 mapping.
Sure.
On D. AD, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, AD. It says the buffer at its narrowest point is never less than either 75% of the required width.
That should not be an either, it should just be them.
Okay, that's what I questioned, because either.
Thank you. Either 75 or nothing.
Okay, so it should say less than 75%.
Exactly.
Okay. That's fine. That's all I have.
I like these editorial comments.
Yeah.
Reading later.
Oh, well, I skipped over one of it. Okay, so
Can't find it now. You can always get us later.
I can come back to you offline.
I like those editorial comments.
Yeah.
I mean, Gary offered one project, activities and uses. We should probably reconcile. So Gary and Nancy, with your skills as editors, please, send them our way where you see an ambiguity.
Try not to be obnoxious about it.
You're never.
We'll let you know.
You have a say in Gracie.
Now that you're on the council, I don't think that you can be held obnoxious.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, you can.
I heard you guys had fun last night.
Doreen, do you have anything? No. Okay.
I don't know.
Well, once again, thank you so much. Yes. Informal group of ruffians.
Social club, Wetland Social Club. I really appreciate all the
Yes.
suggestions. It's great because it gives us something to. But it points out where things aren't clear because, if you look at it enough, you just don't even see it anymore. So, and if you're can't tell what we're saying, then obviously it's not clear and objective or clear.
Thank you for giving us something to work with, though. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like we got a lot of work done on something that's extremely important to the city tonight.
So Robert, do you have any?
Marcy?
Oh, Marcy. Oh, I forget I have to.
Oh, her hand up.
Okay,
I
Marcy.
just wanted to say really thoughtful work and really thoughtful suggestions too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, I'd echo off that. I think we're moving in the right direction, and even though I know there are some concerns right now with our management structure, staffing, all that, I would suggest not waiting on this because the reality is it may take some time to recruit and have a new director up to speed. I don't know if that's a rationale to delay the project. I mean, it sounds like Marcy's already reaching out and working on getting some consultants to help her. It is an important community issue. We're here for these types of things. So it is important. Let's move forward with it. If it takes some extra hours on staff time, it takes some extra hours.
Okay.
But we'll make the capacity.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank
Appreciate it.
Robert, can I ask you a question? I just wanted to ask you a question about the spruce wetland and the project that's been approved there, or,
Yeah.
so I was on the property well, I didn't trespass on it. I was just walking by. And,
Very objective.
Lisa, site.
and I was looking at it because it was raining and it's been very rainy. And it seemed to me, well, the wetland was a lot more robust on that property than it was the last time I looked at it really closely. And so it seems that even with they only have to comply with the 5-foot buffer because that's what's in place. But I sort of felt like I wanted to go out there with a tape measure as soon as they start excavating every day to make sure they're not, because it just seems there's a lot more wetland there than I really realized to begin with. And looking at the plants, for example, that are there, I saw it was sort of dried out looking, and now it's a lot different. So I don't know how are they going to fit all those, how are they going to fit that square footage on what's left of that lot after you take out the wetland and the 5-foot buffer even? It seemed to me that they're really constrained.
So based on the plans that I've seen, they basically touch right on that 5-foot buffer edge as defined on the delineation. And I think there's an argument to be made about delineations with this, because you can come in the middle of summer and it's going to look one way. You come in and, this time of year, it's going to look completely different. And there's nothing that we can really do to say when a delineation has to be prepared, what time of year that has to be prepared. And, unfortunately, I think that's just one of the limitations that we're currently working under, is that here's the delineation prepared by the qualified individual that checks the boxes that is compliant with the code. And that's what we have to work with.
So maybe, and that makes me wonder if in our ordinance, we need to be a little bit more specific about when a delineation is done by a qualified biologist, say that it has to be done in the dry season and the wet season. Not those words, but.
But would having, as Clay suggested, the city have the capacity or the capability of saying we want to have this validated by a third party? What do you think would be an effective way to address that concern?
I think we're getting into questions more for legal.
Yeah.
With that than I would be comfortable answering.
Okay.
That's a question for Bill.
I think that within the community, there's a best practices.
Right. Yeah, we could just find out. We could talk to some wetland biologists and say, what's the.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
50-foot buffer takes
part of the-
care
Right, that's part of the.
of
Right.
what you're talking about.
Right.
Has Bill looked at any of this?
It's been available to him. I don't think I looked at it specifically. I think we want to do one more round of edits and then we will send it to him very specifically. Okay.
So he did edit the measure 49 and the takings part
Right.
and added in some language to it. And he thought it was too sparse.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you guys want another month? How you want?
Let's give him 2 weeks.
Council people have nothing better to do. Don't you want this back in front of you in 2 weeks?
I think you want a break, right?
We got nothing until next Tuesday.
I just heard that the meeting next Wednesday is clear.
I was told to hold that.
Yeah, I think we have something.
Well, we've got something for you.
There's Thursday.
2 weeks.
Yeah, Thursday, 2 weeks would be fine.
Barb, can I?
No, I want it done right.
Okay.
You've given us specific guidance though. So I, you know what I mean? They're very specific suggestions. So I'm not, there's only, I don't think we can guarantee that the mitigation will be perfect in 2 weeks, that part of it, because we may have to talk to a bunch of other people. But.
And you're going to incorporate the Corvallis. Right, terminology.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of on a different point, so I want to make sure we've covered that section before moving to another idea. Are Everybody feel like we've got the time? Okay. Again, great.
No, I don't think we have it down yet.
Well, go.
I think to do it really well, a month does give us a little more time to have some further conversations with people at state.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
because
we've clarified our understanding of what state requires, where the city fits in.
yeah, and it's really hard sometimes to get there in half hour even.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think a month makes sense to me.
In thinking about the timing, and also some of the other issues that we identified as emergencies that need to be taken care of, I'd also like to see another group of folks come together for the trees in particular. There are several planning commission members who've expressed an interest in being a part of that, but we think it's really important for that not only to be just us, other members of the council, the public. So if you have that interest, you can reach out to any one of us, and we can direct this conversation to those who are most passionate about the trees, and we'll get that process running as well, so we can take on these lengthy process.
Don't forget about the Parks and Community Services Committee. That's the tree board.
Okay,
They need to be involved.
got it.
And there's one thing I forgot to mention this when we were talking about emergencies, and I think it is an emergency. I brought four about pesticides and herbicide use in the community. I mean, if you're going to have Roundup going into a wetland, the buffer isn't going to help that much. I mean, it's going to go into the groundwater, and I think I sent around an example of Baltimore City that has a ordinance on the books that has, so far it hasn't been challenged that I'm aware of, but that prohibits the use of three different substances, and they're all listed, and I can't pronounce any of them. But I read about each one of them, and one of them is in Roundup, the other two are not, but that are definitely carcinogenic, kill bees, do, all kinds of terrible things to the environment. And so, it's on private and city property. And if you have a noxious invasive species, and the only way you can get rid of it is by using one of these substances, you have to get a variance to do it. And explain why it's the only way to get rid of.
Not weed.
Yeah. So in a case of using something like, there's nothing else.
That was on that site that you.
Yeah.
The mitigation, it had a not weed infestation.
Right. So anyway, should I send that around again, the Baltimore, because it's been such a long time?
I think the timing would be great.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's something, and I don't think that's going to be this kind of process. I think it's pretty easy to address, like some of the other things have been like no, building on contiguous properties, that kind of easy fix. But I think it's important to do it really quickly, because I'm seeing Roundup use all the time on private property.
Absolutely.
And I put notes on people's doors, but they don't appreciate it. Isn't it funny?
Those products, it's.
No, I've called
Pretty widespread.
hotels here too, where I've seen it used, and
As
they
long
were,
as they keep selling it, people are gonna buy it.
right. And a lot of times the hotels don't even know it's being used. They hire a gardener, the gardener uses it. They don't ask them what they're using, because why would they? They just trust them. And it turns out they're using something that's really terrible for a lot of other plants and animals, so.
Lisa, I forwarded those links to the planning commission and council.
Oh, good, thanks. Someone else can tell me how to pronounce those things.
So Erin, is there anything you wanted to say? Questions or anything? Erin?
Unmute.
Erin?
I really want to thank the social club for all their hard work and very good. I'd like to up it from 50 to 75 or 100 or 300 like Washington, but
In and out.
You're going in and out, Erin.
Yeah. Right now you're all the
say
way. up.
anything about going 300 feet buffer? Is that what I heard?
Might be in a remote place.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's any better.
Right now, that last sentence was good.
Yeah, we're not sure.
So.
Now we don't hear anything. Oh,
Okay. Is there anybody else that wants to say anything?
Well, I just had a quick question. Well, maybe it's not, but so building on, thinking about what Clay had talked about there, the trees, there were two other high profile issues that got mentioned, parking and housing. And I was just curious from the group, how thoughts were we were going to attack that.
I think housing is going to be addressed pretty extensively in the code audit with Marcy, because however we decide this code is going to go, that's one of the issues that has to be addressed to be in compliance with state law. And I think she's going to guide us on that.
That's
That's-
correct.
Okay.
And on the parking, I was also planning to potentially have someone in the wings if something like a parking utilization study needs to be done. But the parking can probably be handled by the existing HerbsWorks team. But anyway, trying to have people kind of on available if they are needed for project kind of topic expansions. That's kind of my goal.
Do you have a desire to volunteer for one of those?
Not particularly,
Okay.
but I was curious because they were important issues and I would be happy to help anybody that's got a clearer vision than me. Marcy, were you provided the transportation system plan? Have you got
Yes.
the document?
Yes, thanks.
We were discussing just briefly the four areas that we had discussed in our last joint meeting, and help me out, fellow planning commissioners, if I missed one here, but we also thought dark skies could be relatively quickly addressed. Whether it's an emergency or not.
Dark skies.
Well, first of all, we have to just enforce our current ordinance. And that's the problem.
Right.
The current ordinance is not terrible.
Right.
May not be as good as the dark sky ordinance, but we're not even enforcing that because we don't have a code enforcement officer, because people don't want to call and rat out their neighbor, and so it's just, we have to figure out how to make sure even our current ordinance is enforced and.
About communication on that one. I
I
mean,
don't think we said there was anything bad with it. I think what we talked about was that it could be a little more specific, and there's some missing elements that to us seemed like they would make it much easier and clearer to the community members to understand it if we
Right.
could revise it a little bit.
Yeah, I
Okay.
remember that too. Yeah, saying that it was hard to read.
It is hard to read.
Yeah, the one we have now.
But there's also, it's a timing issue that I think is really important.
Oh, I do too. I mean,
Oh, what's the timing?
So having reviewed different dark skies, night skies at different communities throughout, a lot of them have an implementation and how long, even if you comply with the amount of light and the intensity of the light, there's also a timing that after a certain time, all lights have to be out, regardless if they comply or not. There are streets in our city that at 4 a.m, and don't ask me why I'm up at 4 a.m, are bright as can be. It's
yeah, that's true.
it's like full daylight.
Yeah. No, that's true.
And then I've also heard complaints that our streets are so dark that people.
There, you can get a headlamp or a high-powered flashlight if you need to walk out.
Dangerous with the elk out there.
I was coming back from the theater the other night and I saw two people with headlights walking down the sidewalk and I thought, well, the side of the street. And I thought, well, that is the weirdest looking thing I've ever seen, but I'm sure it helped them.
Yeah, I have a couple of those. I use all the time.
Just so council knows, we do have that on the April work session.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, good.
Oh, good.
Thank you, Jennifer, for keeping track.
April,
Yeah.
right here.
For council.
Okay, so I think we're ready for good of the order, which Bruce has something, so hopefully he's coming back.
This went to the.
Oh, he slipped out.
Okay.
Oh, let's go
Slipped out
now.
at just the wrong time. You're on, Bruce.
Good of the order. What?
I knew that would happen.
Yep.
Magic.
Record Bruce St. Dennis City Manager. I would like to talk to the council. I sent out an email late this afternoon about trying to meet on the 5th of April. That was the date that we had talked about for City Hall. But I think it would be a good time for staff to get direction from you on both projects. So we will retitle it. And I'd like to talk about site discussion and decisions regarding the City Hall Police Department. For us to make decisions on where we're going to be doing geotech work, that sort of thing. We need to know where the buildings are going to be. Somebody had asked, and we're pleased to provide it, about what the cost would be for certain elements that we're either left over, or if we tried to replace them with property tax, we'll be able to provide you with those numbers.
Thank you, Bruce.
Oh, sure, anytime. And
Can I
yes, please.
add on to that?
Yeah.
And maybe I wasn't clear. And maybe I'm still not clear, but we had already had this discussion back when we were going forward with the discussions on prepared food tax. And we were using the comparison of how much money it would take to generate. And I just wanted to have a number available that shows, like, you know, now we just need to put millions in there.
Sure.
So what would it take to generate, not necessarily the whole thing, but, you know, maybe per $1 million, what's the millage rate?
We could do it by per million, probably would make sense. Because it's pretty much, I don't know if it's linear is the right word, but you need 500,000, you can kind of cut that number. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Runs, that's, I've made myself clear then.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's not about specific items. You can go ahead and do bigger specific items if we give you a cost or a millage rate per million.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, we can do that.
Million or per?
So Bruce, another thing I would like after last night's meeting is what the true lodging tax is in that chart that you gave us yesterday of the other cities on the North Coast. Because we did have one speaker that said ours really isn't 8%, that it's 10.5% because of state and county.
That's the same as all the others, though.
So
All the others have
That's
Scotty County.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the other one,
That's the county.
somebody else was 10, then theirs is 12.5. If ours is 8 and it said they're saying.
So everybody's another 1.5.
Is it
Mhm.
one
Oh, okay. Okay,
on everybody?
Yeah.
1.5 or 2.5?
I'm trying to, I don't remember.
One and
Depending on the
Were those all Clatsop County?
No, there's also.
state tax, part of it's state.
The comparison was all communities in Clatsop County.
No.
Oh,
All the way out to Newport.
okay, so their county may be different.
So it's just, the only thing that we tried to capture was what was the millage rate for the city within, and then there were other things that get put on that are out of their control.
I think it would be beneficial to know what their total
What the real
lodging tax rate is.
right, for all those cities that were listed on that chart.
But for
Clatsop County is easy, add 1.5, but other counties, I think we should really try to compare apples to apples.
Does that 1.5 include the state?
No, I think the state, isn't state 1.5
It's
and then,
2.5.
so
all
it'd
right.
be 2.5, yeah.
As you said, it was
the county is 1 and
No, no,
the
no.
state is 1.5.
Yes,
And so the state's going to be the same no matter what
Right.
city we're looking at. The only thing that might be different is the county, and it actually might be more.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
would you like that level of detail preserved so that you knew if it was different from one county to the next, or do you just want the total?
We'll just add a column. For the addition.
Yeah, right.
For 2 columns.
Yeah.
Okay. And what process? We want to talk about what process do you want to deal with on the cost items? So is there a discussion about removing, I don't know, the Heritage Garden from the Cannon Beach Elementary project? How do you want to talk about those kind of things? Because it may be the portico that goes all the way around. It might be the building that connects the 2 other buildings. How do you want to, you don't have to tell us, that's what we want to find out, because we have given you information on the financial side, and there's also the information that we can provide on the cut side, but we want to know what that is and potentially what your number is to try to get to, because we had done what we thought was a lot. It was about $1 million, and I don't think $1 million is going to do it, make a significant difference on any of the projects that we're talking about.
That's my piece.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking, you know, do you want 4 or 5 off of City Hall and 4 off of, you know, of the Cannon Beach Elementary? We need to know what those numbers are so we can work towards those.
But not.
Just saying that that's what we.
But we should be prepared to talk about it. And I mean, I already have my list on Cannon Beach Elementary.
Yeah.
But I think it's difficult to do that with City Hall and the police station
Exactly,
because of
yeah.
the phase of
Yeah.
different phases of those 2 projects.
Yeah, I can think of a way to do it, and that is to have a budget and try to focus the project towards the budget. And if that still doesn't work with the scope of the, you know, the schematic drawings, then maybe that's the case. But I still think that's something that may help us to advance the discussion.
And I guess would be getting to a budget if you said you wanted this much off of a particular project. Does that seem right?
That's my thinking.
Okay, yeah. But that, and that's it, there's a lot of ways to,
I'm thinking.
there's a lot of ways to get where we need to go. And we just want to hear from you what your priorities are, how you want to speak, and how far you want us to go. Okay. And then when we're talking about Cannon Beach Elementary, there's just a lot of pieces that are like related to the tribe, or for example, one of the things that we know is going to be costing us more money is we originally done square micro lamps in order to be able to use for columns or for beams. But one of the things the tribe asked us to consider is that we never had anything square. So if you're going to be walking through an area that's covered, you know, it would be our preference that you use the round sides, and that takes a little bit of a beefier round column than it would take if it was a square column. So do you want us, one of the questions we'll have is, how far do you want us to go just to try to go ahead and reduce how much we spend on certain elements that have a cheaper price tag, but not necessarily consistent with what we're trying to accomplish with the project. And one of the things that as we're delving more into City Hall, the police station is surprisingly large. And the reason is by comparison to what's there. But if you look at what's there, it's pretty dismal. And so when you have one toilet, a locker room that one person has to leave for the other person to open the locker, and that's it for the amenities. When you put in not two locker rooms, but a single locker room, 2 changing and toilet rooms and shower rooms, those kind of things, all of a sudden the space is like 3-4 times what if you're comparing it.
And so if we're talking about a 1,400 square foot room building now, it's gonna be up around 3,000-4,000.
There's no way we're gonna build the same size as what we have now.
No.
Absolutely no way.
No, I understand that, but it's like, okay, so what is it that you have needed all along? Then all of a sudden it's 3,000, 4,000 square foot size. Because it's just that the combinations are just so bad. I mean, the evidence room being an old.
But I think we can all, I think all of us understand that. All of us understand that what is it, how substandard the current structure is, and that 3,000 or 4,000 square feet is really not a huge structure to house that many police officers. How many people went on the tour with you last night? I'm curious.
None,
Oh, huh.
not a single one. We had a full room, offered the tour, not a single person.
And less than 50% of the people raised their hand that they'd been on the tour.
I don't remember seeing 50%.
But I said less than 50.
You know what I'm saying? But I don't remember seeing people on the tour.
Yeah.
But a lot of people would still, they haven't gone on the tour, but they've been in the buildings.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, just looking at the audience last night.
Yeah, they're different. They don't know that the roof, that's a bearing wall. It's supposed to hold up the roof. And if
You've been arrested.
It's a brace like this. And I was asking about it and somebody said, no, that's not holding up the roof. The roof is holding up that wall.
So
About where Robert's sitting.
Bruce's point about us really not knowing, what the options are to reduce the scope of police department, city hall. Will you have anything for us that would kind of help us in that conversation?
I don't think that there's a big size change you can make in that building. There might be some small things to really compress, kind of like what we're doing in this building. There's some of that. There can be some finishings, some exterior details that may or may not, be included. But that's why I'm concerned when we're talking about big numbers. There's not any low hanging fruit on the size of the building, and the size and time until you build it is what's going to go ahead and drive that cost. So there's not a lot you're going to see to be able to take off.
So at Wednesday's meeting, there'll be tribal representation.
I will ask them to come, yes.
Okay, and police.
If Jason is back, yes. So we'll, at a minimum, we'll have Chris. But,
Because there might be some technical things if we're looking at building sizes and stuff that.
Yeah.
We're not gonna know.
Yeah.
How big in
You put the evidence shelves in the holding cell.
Right.
Yeah, help themselves.
Yeah.
we left, but we have something called the soft interview room. And that's one where the person isn't being violent. And it's from me to Jenna Way to all of the paper records. And so just as easy for me just to go ahead and reach and just make a mess of that room, but that's how we do things now.
And will this involve CETA or Brummik, or we're
Yes,
gonna?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We got a meeting on Wednesday. Oh, boy.
You all look kind of disappointed that was not gonna happen. We try to accommodate.
Thank you.
I didn't have to change the event in my calendar.
And it's
actually, so.
at 6 o'clock, right? Is that?
Right. Is that okay?
We will change the name of it.
It's not gonna be
I
pending.
just had it as City Hall.
I would ask.
CPE, so.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was for.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Anything else for good of the order? Okay, once again, thank you, Social Club.
Thank you.
And thank you, Marcy, for joining us. We'll see you around and meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone.